It's not just a magazine.
Devil Wears Prada 2 came out last week, and I want to use this moment to have a conversation about leadership that I think is genuinely more interesting than anything else being said about this film right now. Because Miranda Priestley is not a villain. She's not a cartoon. She's not even at her core a bully, though she does behave like one sometimes. It's always important to separate the person from the behavior. She is a woman of extraordinary taste, real vision, and genuine excellence who has built something that matters to her more than almost anything else in her life. And she has built it in a way that costs everyone around her, including eventually herself, more than it should have. That's not a villain origin story. That's a lot of small business owners' origin stories. And the reason that I want to make this video is because the parts of Miranda that are most dangerous are also the parts that feel most justified in the moment. The high standards, the precision, the refusal to accept less than excellence. So if you're a small business owner who cares deeply about what you're building, some part of you is going to recognize yourself in her today. And I want to talk about what to do with that recognition. So let's take Miranda Priestley seriously. As a leader, as a case study, and as a mirror. And if you're new here, I'm Jen. I help small business owners lead other humans like a human. Before we get into what Miranda does wrong, I want to spend some real time on something that almost every Miranda analysis skips. And skipping it is a mistake, I think, because Miranda Priestley creates genuine, profound, sometimes irrational loyalty in the people around her. Not compliance, not fear-based staying, actual loyalty. And understanding why is the key to understanding everything else. Just look at Nigel. Nigel has been with Miranda for years. He has absolutely no illusions about her. He's the one who tells Andy with complete calm that Miranda is never happy unless everyone around her is panicked. He says that like it's a weather report. He has metabolized her so completely that her volatility is just climate. And he stays. Not because he can't leave. He stays because working for Miranda has made him better at what he loves than he ever would have been otherwise. And he knows it. He knows it. That is a real thing that happens in real workplaces. When you survive Miranda's scrutiny, when you bring her something and she doesn't dismiss it, when you make a call that she would have made, that feeling is extraordinary. It's like passing an exam that almost nobody passes. People leave Miranda's orbit knowing things about their craft that they couldn't have learned anywhere else. Emily knows this too. Emily, who endures genuine cruelty, who gets passed over for Paris in one of the film's most quietly devastating scenes. Emily stays because proximity to Miranda's excellence feels like its own reward. And here's the hard truth. Emily is not wrong. The access is real. The credential is real. The education is real. She simply decided that those things outweigh the cost. That is not naivete. That is a calculation that a lot of brilliant people make in really high standard environments. So when I say that Miranda is dangerous, I want to be precise. She's not dangerous because she's awful and people are too scared to leave. She's dangerous because she's brilliant. She gets results. She develops people in ways they can feel. And working for her feels like a privilege right up until it quietly destroys you. That is a much more complicated problem. And so in the sequel, HR is finally caught up to her. She can't belittle her staff. She has to learn their names. And the fact that learning someone's name is framed as a corrective measure tells you kind of everything about how far the culture had traveled. She has to hold back. And watching someone with Miranda's talent being told to dial it back, I kept thinking, this is the conversation small business owners need to be having. Because Miranda didn't set out to build a culture of fear. She set out to build something excellent. Sound familiar? So let's talk about the cerulean blue monologue, because it's the scene that most precisely captures both what makes Miranda extraordinary and also what makes her genuinely harmful as a leader. So Andy makes a quiet, eye-rolly comment about two nearly identical belts being treated as a matter of enormous consequence. And Miranda, without raising her voice, without even making eye contact, traces a single color, the cerulean blue, from the Oscar de la Renta runway through department stores, through the bargain bins, directly to the sweater that Andy is wearing right there in that moment. She connects Andy's personal choice to decisions that Miranda made years ago in rooms that Andy never entered. And then she just goes back to her work. And here's what I want you to notice. The information that Miranda delivers is completely accurate, right? Fashion does trickle down exactly like that. Miranda is not wrong. And that is exactly what makes it psychologically devastating. You know, when someone yells at you, your defenses go up. You get angry or scared, and whatever information is theoretically being delivered gets lost. You don't learn from being yelled at. You just sort of survive it. But very precise, cold humiliation does something different. It bypasses your defenses entirely because it doesn't give you anything to defend against. And so Miranda isn't wrong. You can't argue it. So instead of protecting yourself, you absorb. And what Andy absorbs isn't just information about cerulean blue. It's the message that her perspective doesn't count until she's earned a seat at a table that she didn't even know she was sitting next to. This is not feedback that develops someone. That is feedback that diminishes someone while being technically correct. And the distinction matters enormously because feedback that develops someone is also precise. It doesn't pull punches. It names what's real. But it also helps someone understand to think differently so that they stop making the mistake. It builds capacity. Miranda can tell you what's wrong in 6 words. She cannot help you build the judgment to see it yourself next time. So if feedback is consistently precise and consistently non-developmental, what you're building is a team that depends on your judgment for everything because they've never been given the tools to develop their own. That feels efficient in the short term. In the long term, you have a team that cannot function when you're not in the room. And here's the thing. Miranda was never taught how to have these conversations, right? How to be precise and developmental at the same time. How to deliver the hard truth in a way that builds someone rather than just corrects them. I actually have a whole workbook and suite of tools for exactly that. Investment in you ranges from 17 to 37. Link is in the description. So back to Miranda. 2 words. That's all Miranda needs to end a conversation. Not thank you, not good work, not I'll think about what you said. She just likes, that's all.
That's all.
We find it funny, right? We put it on mugs, but let me tell you what it does to a team over time. Miranda never, not once in the entire original film, acknowledges a job well done. The closest that we get to her is deciding not to fire someone, which the people around her have learned to receive as praise. So when Andy gets the Harry Potter manuscript, the win isn't acknowledged. It's the next impossible task that is just assigned at that point. They've built an entire interpretive system around the negative space of Miranda's approval because the positive space doesn't exist. Think about what that does to people over 12 months, right? Over 3 years, 5 years. People stop bringing their best thinking because they've never seen you receive it. They start filtering every idea through what you want rather than what serves the business because there's no feedback loop that rewards genuine risk-taking. They measure success not by growth or impact, but by whether they avoided disappointing you today. And here's the counterintuitive part. That team can look from the outside like a high-performing team. They execute, they comply, they meet the standard, but they are not growing. They are not thinking freely. They are giving you their most defended version, right? Their safest, not their best. At some point, your best people leave. Not usually dramatically, not with a speech, right? They just find somewhere that they feel like they are developing. Somewhere that their contributions are received, not just evaluated. Somewhere they exist. The acknowledgement loop is not soft. It is structural. A team that never hears, good work will eventually stop doing their best work because the investment stops making sense. Miranda operates on one foundational assumption, that her instincts don't require justification. She sees something, she decides, and then she moves. And the entire team spends enormous energy learning to read her, to anticipate, to translate, to execute on non-instruction. Nigel has spent 20 years developing the ability to translate Miranda. It's really impressive, but it's a skill that exists entirely in service of Miranda's instincts rather than in service of his own independent judgment. Here's the leadership cost that never gets named. When you never explain yourself, your team develops judgment for you, not judgment for the business. They learn how to please you. They don't learn how to think. They learn your taste, not taste itself. And when you're not in the room, or when the situation changes enough that your historical instincts don't map cleanly onto the new reality, they are lost. Because everything they've built is dependent on your presence. The sequel makes this very visible. Miranda's navigating a media landscape that has changed dramatically around her, and the people closest to her who know her best are also the least equipped to help her adapt, because they've spent their careers learning to read Miranda, not learning to read the moment. That is not a staffing problem. That is a leadership architecture problem. So if you are building a team where your judgment substitutes for theirs rather than develops theirs, you are creating an organization that is only as scalable as your own bandwidth. And you are leaving your best people intellectually underemployed, which is one of the fastest ways to lose them. The Andy arc is usually talked about as a fish out of water story, or a story about ambition and compromise. But I think that there's a more useful way to read it. It's a story about what happens to your identity inside a high standard, low acknowledgement, never explain yourself culture over time. Andy doesn't decide to become someone her friends don't recognize. She absorbs the environment incrementally, naturally. By the time she's in Paris, she has almost entirely replaced her own instincts with Miranda's. She's learned to see through Miranda's eyes so completely that she's stopped looking through her own. The crack comes when she realizes she's done to someone else what has been done to her. When she becomes the instrument of something she would have found unconscionable a year earlier. That's the moment that she sees herself clearly enough to be disturbed. And I want to speak directly to anyone watching this who recognizes this pattern in their own life right now, where the standards are real and the access is real and the education is real. And also you can't quite remember what your own instincts sound like anymore, where you've been pre-filtering your judgment through someone else's frame for so long that when you try to find your own perspective, you find someone else's there instead. That's what total immersion in any strong culture does to a person. That's not weakness. The recovery is slower than the absorption, but it is available. And so in the sequel, Andy comes back to Runway 20 years later as someone who knows exactly who she is. She takes the hits from Miranda, but she doesn't reshape around them. She succeeded on her own terms, rebuilt from the ground up, and then returned with a foundation that Miranda can't move. And that arc is available to anyone who's been in this kind of environment. It just requires first being willing to see clearly enough to know that you need it. There's a moment in the sequel, Miranda being honest with someone who looks up to her, where she names the price of being Miranda. Not to discourage, right? Not to say, don't do this. Just know what you're choosing and choose it with open eyes. And that's the most generous thing that Miranda Priestley has ever done in 20 years of this story. And it suggests something important, that even Miranda can grow, that the armor is not the person, that the standard and the human being are not the same thing, even when they've been fused together for decades. Miranda didn't set out to build a culture that consumed people. What she did was she set out to build something excellent. The tragedy is not that she built something bad. It's that she built something extraordinary at a cost that was higher than it had to be. If any part of this video made you recognize yourself, right? If the cerulean monologue made you think of feedback that you've given, if that's all made you think of conversations you've ended without closing, if the Andy transformation made you think of someone whose spark looks a little dimmer than when they started, that recognition is not an indictment. It's just information. And information is where change starts. You don't have to choose between excellence and leadership. Miranda's entire legacy is a case study in what happens when someone has the vision, but not the conversation. And you can have both. The link to get started is in the description. And if this made you a little uncomfortable today, good, because that was kind of the point. Go see the film, and while you're watching it, just notice who you recognize.